Joe, watch out. That's getting too close.
Oh no, there's that again.
It's going to capture all of us if we're not careful.
Why can't we get away from them?
My goodness, I'm so tired of that cotton picking thing.
Just keep swimming.
Edna, get the kids out of there, quick.
But they can go in and out of that thing. They made a game out of it.
Hey look, the net is floating to the bottom.
We can't play in it anymore.
There goes another one.
Did we lose anybody this time?
Nope, everyone got away, but those nets dropped.
What happened?
I don't know, and I don't care. We're safe.
And just like that,
poof, they're
gone.
Thanks, guys. As we begin this sermon series, we're talking about if fish could talk. It's kind of this a different perspective that we're taking on Jesus and the sea and all these different stories. And so just trying to shake up our angle just a bit. So let's take a moment and pray. Gracious God, we thank you for the opportunity to be here in the midst of your presence and to continue to recognize that you are here with us and within us. As we prepare for your message this morning, may it be just that, your message and your word and your heart that is revealed. And so help us now to open our hearts and ears and lives and to be ready to receive whatever it is you have for us this morning, and we ask it in your name. Amen. So, okay, seeing the stories of Jesus from the perspective of the fish is a little crazy, right? It's okay, you can laugh. It's this totally different perspective, totally different vantage point. And honestly, the fish's perspective is really unbiased apart from the fact that they want to survive. But they see things just from this sort of black and white sort of view. And we want to look at another way to see this morning's story. As we hear the story today, we hear of the calling of four of the disciples: Peter, Andrew, James, and John. And Jesus is walking along the Sea of Galilee, and he sees these guys standing out there, and he calls out to them. He says, "Follow me." Now, to our foreign ears, that sounds strange. We don't know if these guys have ever met before. We don't really understand what's going on, but we see and we hear and we read of this call, "Come, follow me." And we begin to think, as Jesus is gearing up his earthly ministry, he understands the importance of leading well, and so he wants to bring along with him this group of guys and to make them his disciples. I mean, that's essentially what he's saying. When he says, "Follow me," he's saying, "Be my disciple." So I want to put it in a little bit of context for you. We throw around the word disciple a whole lot in the church, don't we? We want to make disciples. We want to be disciples. We're called to be disciples, all these things, especially in the Methodist Church. Our mission is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. But what does it mean to be a disciple? Right? What does it mean? It's a million-dollar question. Well, in Jesus' day, when someone was a disciple of a rabbi or of a teacher, they spent a ton of time in close daily contact with that teacher. And the result of those interactions was this disciple who had learned about how to behave and about how to carry out the law, not so much from studying the law, not so much from memorizing the law, although those things were helpful. The disciple instead learned by the example of the teacher. I mean, the Jewish texts even say in the Ethics of the Fathers, "More than you study, do." So a disciple is someone who learns by example from a teacher who is greatly invested in them. And this is what Jesus sought to do. I mean, Jesus did. He taught and he ministered to and he healed the multitudes, the masses. I mean, we had this far-reaching grasp. But he also took the time and the energy to pour into this small group of guys so that they could go and do likewise. Now, it would be really easy for us to say, well, Jesus called an elite group. These are the best and the brightest. Jesus wanted to get those who were going to be on top of it and who were going to do things right. But let's consider some of their qualities. These guys are average Joes. They argued. They were not outstandingly brave. They had these petty ambitions even after spending all this time with Jesus. They doubted and they struggled and they lost focus. They were not perfect by any means. And yet, Jesus called them. I tend to think Jesus called them because they were open and they were honest and they were transparent and they were enthusiastic and persistent. I mean, even though they doubted and they struggled, they never walked away. Even though they lost focus and they argued, they were committed to this higher cause. They were looking at a picture that was much bigger than themselves. And quite honestly, I think we could probably find a whole lot of people who would fit this bill. And Jesus called them. If we look at it even further, every disciple was a unique individual. Peter was headstrong. Andrew was homespun and loyal. James and John were often called the sons of thunder. I mean, each disciple represents a different walk of life, a different perspective, a different demographic, and on and on. Each of the disciples is a very unique person. And Jesus called them. And Jesus took this group of average, ordinary, and unique individuals, and he helped them take all of who they were to go and to put that into service for God. And Jesus didn't obliterate their distinctiveness. Jesus didn't tell them they had to behave in one particular way, but instead Jesus celebrated their gifts and their uniqueness and the skills and the personalities that they brought to the table. He used those differences in order to enhance and enrich their opportunities to reach out to others. And if they were all the same, they'd be all trying to chase after the same types of people. Jesus called them. But what did Jesus call them to? Do you remember? Jesus called them to be fishers of men, to be fishers of people. And here's the thing about Jesus. The more you read and the more you study the teachings of Jesus, Jesus is all about people. Everything Jesus did, everything Jesus taught, everything that Jesus talked about had to do with people because Jesus was a relational guy. If people talked about the harvest, Jesus talked about the human harvest. If people talked about the well, Jesus talked about living water. And where others saw buildings and laws and battles and governments, Jesus saw his brethren. And so when people talk about nets, Jesus talks about fishing for men. And Jesus wanted these men to invest their lives into others, to take Jesus' teaching, to take Jesus' leading, and then to go and to teach and to lead others. And is that not what Jesus is calling us to today? I think sometimes we get nervous. We think, oh my gosh, I don't have the skill set. I don't have the ability. I don't have it all together. I mean, don't we have to be succeeding in every single area of our life in order to make some kind of impact on someone else? Don't we have to be successful in all of these things to help others become disciples of God? I mean, how do I lead when I don't have it all together? Yeah. Jesus calls us just as we are. And all that Jesus required of the disciples was to spend time with him and then to show others to spend time with him. And the same is true of us. God calls us to spend time with God so that we can show others how to spend time with God, and everything else will fall into place. There's this great passage. It's a little bit later in the book of Matthew. And it's in chapter 9 and into chapter 10. And Jesus is going out into the towns and into the villages, and he is healing, and he is teaching, and he is leading. And as he is gathering together his 12 disciples, he gives them this charge as we read in the Message version. Don't begin by traveling to some far-off place to convert unbelievers. And don't try to be dramatic by tackling some public enemy. Go to the lost, confused people right here in the neighborhood. Tell them that the kingdom is here. Bring health to the sick, raise the dead, touch the untouchables, kick out the demons. These are all things they just watched Jesus do. You've been treated generously, so live generously. Don't think you have to put on a fundraising campaign before you start. You don't need a lot of equipment. Are you ready for this? You are the equipment. God is calling each and every one of us, and we already have all the things that we need ourselves. And a part of offering up ourselves is this willingness to go where God calls us. We would be negligent if we didn't also look towards the end of the passage and consider the response of the disciples. When Jesus called them, they dropped their nets and they followed. This is kind of what our fish saw this morning. They see the dropping of the nets, the sudden disappearance of the disciples. And it wouldn't have been unusual for a situation like this to occur in those days. But the disciples did it. And the significance that we find is not in the immediacy of them dropping the nets, but instead the finality. When they left that shore and when they went and they followed Jesus, they left behind their nets, they left behind their boats, they left behind some of their family. And what it signified was that there was no way of retreat that was open to them. It wasn't something that they could say, hey, let me go try this out for a while and see if this Jesus thing works out. If not, my boat will still be here. Not the way that it works. They were all in. They had no intention of turning back. And is that not what following God is all about? Allowing God to lead us into all sorts of adventures while we contribute a willingness and a tenacity to stick it out and join in. Not allowing ourselves to be dissuaded by challenges or obstacles or hurdles or different opinions or new ideas. And knowing all the while that it's not about us. It's not about the things that we can gain or about whether or not it's going to make us happy, but we know that we're going to gain all kinds of things and that we're going to find all kinds of joy in the midst of the process. So where does this leave us today? What are we asking today? What is God asking today? I think today God is saying to us, you are called. 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 We are called by God to take who we are, our gifts and our skills and our personalities, and to use that for the service of God. Are you a great teacher, a leader, a caregiver, perhaps an encourager, or a builder, or a giver? Maybe you're a really great parent, or grandparent, or friend. What is it that you have to offer? We're all good at something. It doesn't have to be big and great and grand. We don't all have to move to Africa. We don't all have to travel down to where the deepest, darkest reaches of the earth are, but we have to take who we are and offer it to God in service. And not only that, God calls all of who you are, your brokenness and your humanness, and God asks us to offer that for the service of God. I mean, who wants to follow somebody who is absolutely perfect unless they're Jesus? It's really hard to follow somebody who's perfect. When you see somebody who is leading or who is calling after us, who has that brokenness, we identify with that. And we say, hey, it's okay. They don't have it all together. Spend a couple minutes with me, you'll know I don't have it all together. But God uses that. God uses that. Do you trust that? Do you trust God with all of you? And God uses all of this. God uses all of you. In fact, God uses all of us. So what are we waiting for? Let's drop those nets and follow God. Amen.